Hi, and thank you to the organisers for inviting me back. Those of you who've seen me speak before will know that given the title of this presentation, I'm going to concentrate very much on clinical and moral ethical issues and probably less on compliance, which I'm sure will be extremely disappointing to most of you. I think first a bit of a struggle with my clicker. Oh, here we are. A presenter's note. Giving a lot of talks, and one of the problems with giving talks is that some of the slides you see over and over again, and some of the slides in this presentation are the same as the ones I used 2 weeks ago in a compliance conference. Fortunately for me, barely anyone who goes to compliance conferences goes to digital conferences. There are one or two exceptions. And barely anyone who goes to digital conferences goes to compliance conferences. And is it then any blooming wonder we get stuck? Because actually we always go to the things that we're interested in, and we never learn enough about what the other people are interested in. So we perhaps need a bit more cross-collaboration. So that's perhaps my first point. But the big point I was making at this compliance conference, and which I'm making again today in a different context, is that compliance is always secondary to morality and to our consideration of morality. And when we forget that, we fail the industry. Tim Ringrose said earlier, I think what he described, he said the pharmaceutical industry has lost its moral virtue. Well, you may feel this is paradoxical, but I think our obsession with compliance at all costs, driven by lawyers, is actually responsible in part for that, in large part from that. There is no moral virtue in doing what you have to do. If somebody stood over you with a big stick forcing you to do something, well, so what? Where's the good in you? What moral purpose do you have? Until we convince the rest of the world that we can do things without a big stick over us, without compliance rules, then we will never regain our moral virtue. I was talking as well about this paradigm that we are now currently, in my belief, operating to within the pharmaceutical industry, and which is killing things like digital innovation. It's a paradigm in which everything in the black area, this is stuff I can't do because I'm told it's bad. I'm not thinking it's bad, don't know what I'm thinking, but I'm told it's bad by people in compliance. But everything above that line that's not in the bad, I can do for myself and my company and my brand and to make money because it isn't in the bad stuff. And that unthinking approach has led us to make mistakes. Because people operating up there think they can do things just because they haven't been told it's bad. And that's not true. And when they do make a mistake, in order to stop anybody doing anything like that again, the compliance bar goes up again. And we put more stuff in the bad stuff so that nobody can do it. This paradigm is failing us, and it's failing us in social media. Because at the end of the day, and back to the compliance issue, nobody cares in the wider world if you're compliant or not. They care in digital and social media, as we know when we're out there and we're on Twitter, about what they think as humans. They don't care whether you've kept your law or your codes or your internal SOPs. Now, you'll recognise this from Dave Hunt's talk this morning. Well, barely recognise it because my PowerPoint skills aren't as good. But it's essentially the same theme. And me and Dave have talked about this at length, which is why you see some consistency here. I believe very much in the model that Dave was talking to, and it's something I've talked about a lot. There are things that you can do in the blue circle for the good of humanity. I think it's better than this black and white approach that we're taking. So we can do lots of good things. But you can't do everything you'd like to do that's good because you just can't afford to as a business. Business sense means that you have to stop somewhere in doing good. But similarly, in the red circle here at this side, you can make money, I'm sure you can make money by doing bad things. There are some drugs organisations in certain parts of the world who make billions of dollars doing bad things. Bad things can be profitable. But you don't do them because they're bad. And we must operate in this area of good business. And the compliance line is working out what is where does the bad things start, the things we shouldn't be doing. But this model, I think, is better because if you're thinking morally, you're not just thinking about what we shouldn't do, which is a minimum standard. You're obligating yourself to do as much as you can for the wider world, to bring as much benefit as you can, to reduce harm as much as you can, to reduce, improve people's autonomy and reduce injustice and unfairness in the world. That's what you're doing if you're acting morally. If you're acting compliantly, you're just doing the bare minimum that the rules ensure that you must. Now, the third thing from this conference a couple of weeks ago was I was asked to give consideration how I would change company culture. And I gave about 10 suggestions, but this was my biggest. If I was CEO of a big pharmaceutical company tomorrow, I would make it company policy to slap anybody who said that anybody but the patient, the end user, was the customer. Part of the problem that we've got into as an industry is that we're looking at the customers as the health professionals, as the payers. These are people we've got to deal with to get to our customer. If we treat the health professional as a customer, we will make mistakes because we're putting the patient somewhere down in the wines and spirits of our considerations. We only do things for health professionals to help the patient. When you're doing things to help the professional by himself, then you're in the area of bribery. Now, this quote, well before the days of internet and digital and social media, I'm sure you're all well aware of. It's rolled out when people are feeling emotional about the pharmaceutical, about what we should be doing, and in these sorts of talks. We try never to forget that medicine is for the people. It is not for the profits. The profits follow, and if we have remembered that, they have never failed to appear. The better we remember it, the larger they have been. Many of you will know that it was said by George Merck, but it was said in 1950. 1950, how much crap has gone under the bridge in that time because people have forgotten that? My proposal is that actually we really take that to heart and stop just playing lip service. Because common morality, what ethicists call common morality, those values that we hold dear as humans, that everybody in this room holds dear, that were honed through hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, is the connection to me between the business and working in the patient benefit and the compliance rules. There is not a compliance rule that you can mention that I cannot tie back to an ethical principle somewhere. You may not agree with it, you may have other opinions about that, but they can all be tied back. But if we're truly acting in the patient interest, and as Dave proposed, that is in the business interest, then we must be acting morally, because morality is about how you consider other people and how you look after other people. Now, when I'm doing my compliance training, I call it compliance training so people know what I'm talking about when I'm trying to sell it. But actually I talk more about ethics, just if you ever did ask me, so you're warned. I try to get people to work through a little algorithm, if you like, when they're stuck in difficult situations. And this is perfect, I think, for when we're considering things in social media and in digital activity. The first thing, and this is really what's going to be the subject, the rest of my talk, is the bit that we always miss out, and it's the most important bit. The first bit is it ethical to me? Thinking about what I'm trying to do, can I, as a human, justify it? Forget the law, forget your SOPs, forget your business needs. Can I justify what I'm about to do? Because if you can, because you're a human and you're all pretty decent humans, you'll tend to make the same sort of decision as other humans. You're already well on the way to actually justifying a good activity. People tend to run and jump first to, is it compliant? And then go and ask somebody else, and ask somebody in legal or ask somebody in compliance. But that is the second step. Third step is choose the more conservative option. Just because I think something is ethical, if I know there's a rule against it, I shouldn't be doing it because wider society or the company or whoever has decided that's not appropriate. because these things are grey areas, as the slide is trying to indicate. Think about misperception, as we'll discuss in a second, and there's always a reality check. Sometimes you're always going to be in the grey when you're making these decisions, and then some reality checks come in, like what's the chance of me being wrong, and what's the consequence of me being wrong on this particular decision. Okay, so to apps. Is the app I'm proposing ethical? How do you consider that question? Well, I'm going to use this theory of ethics that I've already alluded to, the 4 principles of common morality. And this theory says essentially that all of us as humans share 4 principles that we all hold dear. We balance them off differently, and that's why we reach different decisions about what's ethical, but we all use the same 4 principles. Bring benefit to people, beneficence. Minimize harm to other people, non-maleficence. Not don't cause harm. That's a common misconception. Primum non nocere is not really accepted as a theory within ethicists. We do cause harm sometimes, bringing good, and some of the apps that you develop will interfere with patient care and cause negative effects for some people. You have to be prepared for that in balancing things off. Think about individual rights of choice, the principle of respect for autonomy, people's autonomous rights to make decisions. And be fair. We all expect fairness, the justice principle. So the first of those to think about your app is, how much good does my app bring to the patient? Because the more good you can get into your app, the more people you help, and the more you help them, the better the case for your app. And I've just picked one. This is an app from Lilly, look at helping patients with glucagon. And I like apps like this that help patients who are actually on treatment. It's not wrong to provide more information once a patient's on a treatment. It's a good thing. Regulators might believe that the patient information leaflet is the bee's knees, the be-all and end-all of patient information. I don't. It's not fair that some patients can't understand that writing. We've got the capacity in some of the interactive tools that we have to actually give much better understanding to people so they get more benefit from their treatments. And it reduces the harm to them. So we should be doing more of this stuff, and it's a powerfully good thing to be doing. And just as a little aside, people often ask me, well, is a product-specific app that a person may download after they've been prescribed a medicine, is it promotional or non-promotional? And that doesn't really compute with me. I tend to think of them as attributes of the product. In other words, like any attribute of a product, you can't promote it to patients before they're on the drug, but you can promote it to doctors as a good reason for them to be given a drug. And people like apps, and they see the good in them. And again, in my searching, we came across this, the European Directory of Health Apps, which was a review by patient groups and empowered consumers. I couldn't find the review by disempowered consumers, but might come out at some point, perhaps. But interestingly, within that, they put Angry Birds. Angry Birds was one of the health apps within that document, which surprised me slightly. And I do think that it's important when we're developing apps and developing ideas to help people that we make sure that we are really bringing benefit, that we're not creating homeopathic apps. It's a challenge for me in an agency, that I don't start. I've got to draw lines about the sorts of interventions I'm going to support with what I do, and there's those that I'm not. I could probably make a lot of money helping out companies who are selling nutritionist products with quacky science, but I'm not going to do that. I have to draw a line somewhere. And I think as well, in our digital interventions, we should really look at the science of them and not as well, and proof for them if we can find it, so that we can build a case for them. How much harm could your app do? The principle of non-maleficence is show that you've considered this as you go through the process of developing your app, or any intervention in truth. It's not, again, that you won't ever harm people by them getting the wrong end of the stick through information that you put out there, but that you have considered it, and you've seen to be considered it, is important if somebody criticises you down the line. The key thing in this, and this is an app that I worked on called My Asthma, my biggest contribution was to say, get some external advice. Sometimes I do come across companies designing interventions for patients sat in a room in the company with a medical advisor or whatever. Get some external advice into your interventions. Ask those external advisors, what's the chance of harm? And don't talk about harm in loose, airy-fairy terms. What's my chance of harming outliers, unusual people, people who don't understand the information, people who get the wrong end of the stick, people who arrive at the website on the wrong page or whatever? What's the chance of me harming people? How do I mitigate that harm? I've thought about a potential harm. Doesn't mean to say I'm not going to go ahead, but how do I stop that happening? How do I stop upsetting doctors? Now, I've put unreasonable referral here. We have got to be cautious that some of these interventions don't unreasonably refer people to doctors. But I'm all for actually referring people to unreasonable doctors. You know, part of the importance of this sort of work is that patients who have got substandard healthcare actually seek it out a bit more. So I'm all for upsetting doctors if they're not doing their job properly. But make sure that referrals that come from these sorts of inventions are right, and you need external advice for that. And also ask the question, can we do more with this to help more people? Again, it improves the morality of the app, very simply. And sometimes harm, and apologies to people in Pfizer, because with any examples I put up of these, it's always there, but for the grace of God go I. But of course we have to be careful about what our interventions are doing. And clearly part of the rationale behind the compliance regulations that are coming in, and we've seen recently from the FDA around apps, is to make sure they're calculating correctly and intervening correctly. We can't risk harming people by apps that make a bad calculation, and this was one that was miscalculating a value for doctors, which could have consequences for patients. So clearly it's important that these sorts of harms are avoided as well, and that, as I say, is why compliance regulations come in. Have I paid due respect to the free will of my audience? This is hugely important. In fact, all of, this drive, all these figures coming out about how big social media is and the digital age and the revolution, etc. It's powered by the desire for autonomy. It's powered by the desire for people to express opinions, to grasp knowledge, to empower themselves, to increase their autonomy. And it is this drive for autonomy, this drive for freedom of individuals, is what we're all trying to deal with all the time. And it's also what will penalise us if we get it wrong, in social media particularly. People will express their opinion. People will criticise us. And it's also anti to a lot of what the regulators want. And to some extent, I would say, to what doctors want. I was a GP, sat there once, and it is damn irritating when somebody comes in who knows more than you to ask you for your opinion and then tell you what you should think. Well, tough. That's the way the world's going. Doctors will have to get used to it, and probably regulators too as well, to some extent. So respecting autonomy requires several things. It is powered by knowledge, and when we give knowledge to people, we give them better autonomy to act. So it's a good thing. But it's important that that is the truth, whatever that is. And for people to assess the truth, they need to know have complete transparency about where that truth is coming from. It also covers things like confidentiality, and again there's lots of data regulation, data protection regulation and such that is there to back that up. But the first thing is, confidentiality is about respecting this principle of autonomy, which we all fundamentally understand. And it's also about rights of privacy. Just a little example of autonomy in action. This is an app about which is encouraging doctors to test for epidermal growth factor receptor mutations in lung cancer from AstraZeneca. And this app from HAVAS LYNX is, in my opinion, just brilliant. Okay? I think it's fantastic. That's a fact. I should also tell you, in addition to my work for pharmaceuticalethics.com, I now head up HAVAS LYNX Medical. I work for HAVAS LYNX. Those are two facts, but you can't assess the first one unless I've told you the second one. It is all about the principle of respect for autonomy, and that is the principle of respect for autonomy in action. I would be unethical if I hadn't told you that second bit. How can I increase the fairness with my app and reduce unfairness within it? In other words, a good argument for a lot of what we do, because it's going out to so many thousand pieces, is actually we're increasing fairness in society, in the wider world. But also, if we're not careful, our app might be unfair to some people. Let me show you a little bit about what I mean about fairness. Just talk to that a second. As I've said, it's unfair that some patients suffer because of ill-informed health professionals. It's a good thing to try and increase that baseline of knowledge out there in the world about all sorts of disease conditions. And we should defend our right to do it and make sure we do it well. But it's also unfair, as an example, if I cannot understand this app that I've downloaded because I've got poor literacy. So have you thought about the literacy level of the information that you're giving? Have you thought about other languages that it should be made available in so that people can understand it? There is also, I think, a challenge to us in digital agencies and such, is that it's unfair I cannot be helped because I don't have a smartphone. Now, you can't always do things about this. Sometimes things have to be digital because that's the program. But also we should think some people aren't in the digital age yet. And even though we might be in a digital agency or working for a digital part of the company, doesn't mean to say we can't think about paper-based things as well, and helping and increasing the fairness of what we do and add justice to it, because it makes it better, it makes it more moral. But the other thing is that it's unfair not to follow rules that other people have to follow. And so there is a moral justification for following compliance regulations. You can't just ignore the rules that society set or that government set. They have moral basis as well. So balance. I said earlier that in truth these four principles, though they're all very dear to us, we balance them off individually in different ways. That is the reason we reach different ethical decisions, for instance, about whether the rights and wrongs of euthanasia, for instance. Good people can come to completely different decisions because they have different opinions about the value of each of the principles. Now, the problem with compliance people, and I know because I've worked in compliance departments as well, and I've signature for donkey's years, and I've had the same problem, is it's never difficult to tell I'm paraphrasing P.G. Wodehouse here, but it's never difficult to tell the difference between somebody with a sunny disposition and somebody in compliance. Compliance people will always generally see the worst possible thing that can happen as a result of the activity you're suggesting to them. I know I've done it myself, and you feel it's your job when you sit with that responsibility to see the problems. But it's important as well to balance that with the good things that can come out of your intervention. But critical in that is that ethical objections, and an objection from somebody signing something off, can only be overcome with ethical arguments. Sometimes when, I've been saying, no, we can't do that, people come back and say, well, we really need to do it because, we're right at the end of the year and we're behind budget. That's not a good argument. It's a bit like saying, I'm going to rob a bank. And I say, well, I don't think you should rob a bank because I think that actually is immoral. And you'll say, well, I really need the money. It's still not a justification for robbing a bank. But if you came to me and I said, I'm going to rob a bank, and I said, well, no, you can't, I don't think it's moral. You say, well, actually, it's a bank and it holds lots of the earnings of drug cartels in South America and immoral earnings, and I'm going to rob it and give all the money to starving children. That's a better argument. I might not agree with you, but that's a better argument. You must respond to ethical objections with ethical arguments and get better at doing that to make your things happen in the real world of companies and compliance departments. And I just want it's another Lily app by a chance, but just sort of an example of that perhaps in action. This is an app that's on the US App Store. I couldn't actually, I'd sort of got access, but I went to the website anyway as well and had a look at it. I did have to lie and say I was a US doctor, but you know, hey, I'm not that ethical. And, you know, I think it's fantastic. It's talking about the Lilly oncology pipeline. So there's lots of information in there about medicines that aren't yet licensed. Now, many companies would throw a bit of and I think there's somebody from Lilly here, so maybe wants to comment on it, but would have a bit of a fit about this. You know, the idea of they'd say, well, it jumped to that negative that it might be promotion outside the license. But you've got to respond with arguments to justify it. Now, under the principle of justice, I would argue this sort of thing is fantastic, because it's not fair if I as a patient don't get access to a clinical trial because my doctor doesn't know about it, about a particular medicine or a particular clinical trial, because whereas a doctor down the road with another patient does know about it and that patient's getting access. So under the principle of justice, I'd say this information is useful to oncologists. It is also justified under autonomy, helping oncologists make decisions for their patients, good, well-informed decisions based on what might be coming along. So we need to balance these arguments off and put some of the good things that can come out of some of these interventions against some of our worries and concerns and do it more effectively to make it happen. And then mitigate, reduce the chance of misperception. Again, I'll use this, the Lilly app as an example. I've got no background information on this particularly, but when I went to the website, this was the landing page. It's hardly welcoming. But that's good. People who are looking into this website must really want that information, and that will be part of my mitigation and defense should anybody criticize me. Similarly, the language is very basic. It's saying very basic things about what happens with the drugs. It's not trying to make claims. It's not trying to do anything underhand. I believe it, and I believe their intention in doing it is above board and right and the right thing to do. Now, we've got to the end of the presentation. I've only just got to, is my app compliant? And by great good fortune, this is my compliance slide. Because the fact is, you know and I know that you're not really interested in the detail of the regulation and you won't remember it for that long, but you must get that sort of advice. There are compliance rules to go through. We know that the FDA has brought out new regulations. We know that there is a need for some apps to be registered, for instance, in the MHRA as Class 1 medical devices. Get that expertise, because one of the problems here with the regulation is if we are lazy about this regulation stuff and we start downgrading our apps and our interventions in order so that we don't have to go through a regulatory process, then we're failing our patients again. You do have some hoops to go through, and you must get the expertise in-house in order to make it happen. So in summary, do as much good as you can for your patients. Remove the chance of harm as much as you can for your patients. Respect the free will of the individuals you're dealing with, and increase fairness in life generally, and remove unfairness from what you're doing. Those are actually the qualities required to be a pretty good human being in general, and they're no different from the qualities required to make good interventions in digital and social media. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my point. Thank you very much.
Can I start with one? So the way we looked at our ethics with our service was that we base every decision within the company as though the service we're trying to create is like your uncle who's a doctor or your auntie who's a doctor. And that governs everything we do, from going to a conference. Would we go here if it was your uncle or auntie? They don't write prescriptions, they don't do this thing. We find it makes it very easy when you structure it like that around some, and I think you some of those points right at the beginning where you said, you know, understand why you're doing this and that type of bit.
Yeah.
Do you think that can scale to larger companies, to you know, major pharmaceuticals, to have one line that can almost just govern every decision you make? Because we've made this sort of mental model. What would your uncle or auntie do? You know, as a doctor, you know, people, family will come up and say, at Christmas party, something. And you'll say, look, I'll write this down for you, go to your doctor, say this, but I'm not going to consult you, I'm not going to be your doctor. And so we sort of tried to you know, build a model that would emulate that for people obviously who don't have an uncle or an auntie, or maybe have an uncle or auntie who doesn't want to consult them.
I mean, it's a very good way of thinking about the problems, because essentially the model that I showed is just a way of structuring, of thinking through a particular problem, to try and think of issues of justice, good and bad, but ultimately it is largely about what would you want to happen to you. What would you want? And we do have, you know, we've all done it. The fact is, we sort of put ourselves out of that and start thinking about what the business wants and what the business needs. But I think there is a value in putting yourself in the position of a patient at the other end and thinking through it like that, if that's what you're implying.
Have you seen any big companies actually take an approach where they say, you know, or move to that approach, where they're just saying, you know, we're going to act like a person rather than a...
Not that particular one. Frankly, I'm dying for a company to actually get, and maybe there's some represented here, but that get out of this compliance paradigm as their first thought about how to do the right thing. My concern at the moment is that companies feel that by being having more and more compliance people and more rules, they're somehow going to stop making problems, and that somehow that's going to reassure the public. And I think that's just flawed thinking.
Can we have another question? There we are.
So pharma can be its own worst enemy when it comes to engaging with topics around compliance or bad pharma or even good pharma, particularly in a social sphere. How do you think we can do better?
I think, I think there is value in understanding in thinking through these sorts of things about how people work out what's good and bad. I'd go back to this point that nobody really cares whether you've been compliant. If you've made a mistake and your response on social media is we followed the rules, you've lost your argument. You need to argue as humans, essentially, because there's humans at the other side, and think, you know, to the point earlier, how you would feel if you heard this. So I feel we need to just get a way back to that to understand those sorts of thinking. I mean, I'm trying not to say what you all need is really good training on this stuff, but I think it would help if people actually had conversations about ethics and morality in their companies more than compliance, or at least alongside compliance. I'm not saying compliance isn't important. Rules are necessary for coordinated activity and for order in society. But at the moment we divorce compliance from the creative side of what we do. Ethics is the link, and we need to be having more conversations about the morality of what we do.
A question for David, I guess. You mentioned Microsoft Health Vault and PHR. What is your feeling about individual users, consumers, patients, their appetite for having that own personal health record? What's the appetite for them to have all of this information? So I guess that's the first question. The second question, I guess, is for the other presenter, is more around, we've heard a lot of being discussed around, you know, privacy, around patient data and so on. There are organizations out there like Patients Like Me that are actually selling that data on to others. Do patients and consumers really care how that information is used?
Okay, Nick, you nail that one, and then when we start the session, the discussion afterwards, we'll talk about the HAVAS as a starter.
I'm not I'm not sure I'll nail it, but my first question almost back to you is, do patients really know what's happening with their data? Do people really know what's happening with their data? I suspect we don't. I suspect we'd be more horrified if we were, but I don't know the answer to your question in terms of, is there a poll on it? I would be upset, back to the point, if somebody was selling my data without my knowledge.